two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with the two socialists recently elected to City of Ithaca Common Council. Jorge DeFendini will be one of the two who represent the First Ward, and Hannah Shvets will be one of the two who represent the Fifth Ward. Both were elected by solid margins, Jorge by a super margin. And I have to do a disclaimer about my own roles. I was heavily involved in city politics back in the 1980s and 1990s, first campaigning with Democratic Socialist Ben Nichols, then working as his administrative assistant for about 5 years. Recently, I have again become involved. I worked a little with Jorge's campaign and a lot with Hannah's campaign. I am famous or notorious as someone who very frequently speaks before council. I will be asking both Jorge DeFendini and Hannah Shvets about their plans for the coming 2 years. Hannah Shvets and Jorge DeFendini, you have already told me what are the 4 issues you want to talk about, so I will ask you about each of them in turn. Zoning reform is the first. What is the role of the city in zoning? Hannah, go ahead.
I think the role of the city is to create a zoning code in which it is as easy as possible to build housing that Ithacans can afford. And the city is already making really good progress towards this last week with the South Side zoning plan. And I hope that they'll continue to expand this throughout the city, make it easier to build duplexes, multifamily homes, mixed use zoning, and just make it, a city in which people can stay and afford to live in.
Jorge?
Yeah, so zoning actually represents one of the few things that a small locality like us in Ithaca can control to tackle the housing crisis. So I often like to think that there's sort of two wings to the bird that represents the housing crisis here in New York State. One of them is housing supply, and then the other is tenant stability, tenant protections. So far, we've done a really good job on the tenant protections front, oddly enough. We have really banned short-term rentals with some carve-outs, and we have also opted into good cause eviction, a multi-year fight that's going to give people a lot of stability in staying in their homes. And so now it's time to turn to the other wing of this problem, which is the supply issue. There simply isn't enough housing, specifically enough affordable housing in the city, and it's because of our archaic zoning. So places like Fall Creek, the South Side, a lot of neighborhoods that Ithaca's love, it's technically illegal to build right now. It's not in line with our zoning code, and that's because we haven't kept it up to date. By changing our zoning code, we're actually going to make it legal to build the type of housing that Ithacans already like and make it more dense, transit friendly, and allow for more types of development for affordable housing to take shape here in Ithaca.
So, Hannah Shvets and Jorge DeFendini, you suggest that the city can do something to stabilize rents. What can the city do? Go ahead, Hannah.
So, what the city can do is opt into legislation that's already been passed on the state level. So, for example, the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, the ETPA, already passed and exists in both New York City and Kingston. So, all that Ithaca would need to do would be to complete the necessary steps, including a vacancy study, and opt into it. It's very possible it's been done before, and it would be really huge because Ithaca is a city in which rents increase exponentially every single year, and many people are forced out of the city. So, like Jorge said, along with increasing supply, which is a very key part of this puzzle, we also need to make sure that the housing being built is not increasing by more than it needs to, so the housing maintains affordability.
And Jorge, do you have more
Something
to?
you're gonna, yeah, something you're going to hear a lot this episode is some variation of I agree with what was just said by X person. So I completely agree with Hannah that this is one of the things on the tenant stability side that we can still do in Ithaca, opting into ETPA. In fact, one of the last things I did on the Common Council previously in 2023 was secure the funding for us to actually conduct this vacancy study and opt into ETPA, quite like our cousins in Mid-Hudson Valley over in Kingston did a couple of years ago. Now, unfortunately, those funds have been encumbered by the city planning department, so we're going to have to push to get those reallocated back to conducting a study. And most importantly, however, while many of the beneficiaries of ETPA, rent stabilization, in the future could be residents in my ward, specifically in West Village and Chestnut Apartments, me and Hannah have been advocating that the New York State pass the REST Act. And I apologize for not having the acronym off the top of my head, but we could think of this as sort of a modification to the existing ETPA Act. If we were to pass the REST Act, a lot of the archaic arbitrariness that currently befalls the ETPA Act, so conducting this vacancy study and having it only apply to buildings built during and before 1973 with 6 or more units.
74.
74. Thank you.
Yes, I was part of that. I
Very,
mean,
and so you know better than most that like this is going to be, it's very targeted, and the impact and benefit, while real in Ithaca, would be very limited. However, if we pass the REST Act, a great number of apartments would be eligible for rent stabilization that ETPA currently would provide to only not a handful, but a much more select few of units in our city.
okay, good. Um, so Jorge and Hannah, TCAT, our buses. TCAT has been in the news, but the city is not exactly in charge of TCAT. What can the city do? Hannah?
Well, although the city is not the only one in charge, the city definitely has its role to play as one of the three underwriters. So, what I think the responsibility of the city is over the next few years, when various contracts are being renegotiated, is to make sure that the city is fighting for its constituents to have reliable public transportation. And that means working with Cornell to make sure that they're also funding the public transportation as the user that makes up more than 70% of all of TCAT ridership. That's going to be really important next year. When the city, the county, TCAT, and Cornell are negotiating over service and where TCAT runs. I also think the role of the city should be to speak to its constituents and see which holes need to be filled. There are definitely places in Ithaca where TCAT does not reach the way that it should. And there are places where TCAT runs very well. On campus, TCAT runs every few minutes, but if you get farther out, if you live in Jorge's ward, if you live up in Cornell Heights, it becomes much harder to reach downtown, the grocery store, the park, all the things that people need to reach. People who don't have cars. So the city should be speaking with TCAT and making sure that the routes that need to be included, adjusted, are being included and adjusted.
And Jorge?
Yeah, I think Hannah really touches on a really good point there in terms of the imbalance and the inequality that we're seeing in how TCAT service is really allocated. In the past, when I previously served on the Common Council, the biggest challenge that we had to deal with was a driver shortage. We simply did not have enough drivers to meet all of the routes. And while, that's not an issue any longer, it has been mitigated due to really important interventions by the TCAT organization and by the underwriters committing to hiring and retaining TCAT drivers more often. And so now the issue that we have to deal with is the funding of the overall project. I mean, the numbers that we saw in the news were astronomical. The fact that TCAT was asking for about a I believe it was $500,000 to stay operating at its current rates. And Cornell's counteroffer was to provide $31,000 for each underwriter. Uh, I mean, not even a fraction. And it was very clear, as we've seen as things have ended, that this was a negotiating move to try to get at a number that they were much more comfortable with. I think we have a serious question on our hands on how do we deal with a partner that does not want to play ball. And when the stakes are if people can make it to the grocery store, to their job, around the town without being car dependent, which is really important for our climate goals. How do we deal with a partner that doesn't want to believe in this being a public good, but as an inconvenience for their bottom line? And I think we're going to have to hold a lot more rallies. We're going to have to hold a lot more tough negotiations. And I'm so glad to have both Hannah and Kayla on the council to be having these discussions alongside of to really have a coordinated effort between the city government and the greater community.
Yes, well, I live in a house that does not have off-street parking, and we ditched our car decades ago. So we are TCAT riders for sure. But I'm interested in the two of you. Do you ride TCAT?
Oh yeah.
I
Um, when I lived on College Town, right across the street from you, Teresa, I rode the TCAT often to get to my previous job over at Annabelle Taylor Hall. And now I live downtown, and I work at a different nonprofit that's over on the South Hill Business Campus. And I grew up in the city, Queens, where I had a very good MTA system, and so I came to Ithaca without a driver's license. So until very recently TCAT was the only way I could make it to work from South Side all the way up to the South Hill Business Campus. And there's about an hour between each bus. So if I don't make the 8 o'clock bus from Green Street all the way to the South Hill Business Campus, I'm not going to be getting to work until about an hour and a half into my shift. And for a whole lot of people who don't have the benefit of like a union job with progressive discipline, uh, that could be a deal breaker and could have their life spiral out very quickly. So it's something that we need to address as an economic affordability issue alongside a transit issue.
And Hannah?
I've been riding the TCAT since I was 12 years old, I think. It was my main form of transportation with two working parents. I lived near the Ithaca Mall, so the only way to get downtown to any sort of things that were going on was using the 30. So I've been riding this bus for a decade and don't know where I would be without it. Like Jorge said, the only way to get to work is on the TCAT. I had a school bus, but if I wanted to do any sort of after school activities, I would go home on the bus. So I think it's really important, especially for people who live in, the more rural areas around Ithaca. The only way that they get into the city of Ithaca is using the TCAT.
Well, Jorge and Hannah, we have been hearing from comrades in New York City and in the Hudson Valley about a bill in both houses of the state legislature called Permanently Affordable Social Housing for New Yorkers. It would create a state authority that could finance the acquisition, construction, and repair of residential buildings that would be state-owned or cooperatively owned by the residents or possibly part of community land trusts, which means not-for-profit ownership of the land, though the houses on it can be owned by the residents. I happen to know that the mayor will be calling on council to pass a resolution favoring it. What could you do, Jorge?
Yeah, so I can tell you the first time I was exposed to the concept of permanently affordable social housing was in a YouTube video by a then Assembly member Zoran Mamdani talking about how this incredible project called Red Vienna in Austria and how the labor and socialist efforts there had taken a massive step in tackling the housing crisis and making public goods out of housing. to the point where now public housing is the dominant form of housing relative to the private sector. And I thought that was an incredible job. Is there anything the city council can do about that? And all of my housing advocates said, not really, but we could be doing a whole lot at the state level. In fact, here's a bill on it that, in fact, Zohran Mamdani was working on. And now I'm looking forward to seeing his advocacy continue that way as mayor. And so for me, what we could be doing on the city level for permanently affordable green social housing is very akin to what we did during the good cause eviction fight. So as many folks who are listening may remember, we tried to pass good cause eviction here at the city level before the state courts ruled that it was preemptive, meaning that this was something that only the state government could do. So we very much just switched gears. We didn't throw up our hands and say, "Oh, there's nothing else. There's nothing else I can do." We got to saying, "Let's go to Albany and petition for this." So I think it's a great step that Mayor Cantelmo is going to be passing a resolution, because when I was a city councilor, I had us all sign a letter and got 10 out of 11 city councilors to call on Governor Hochul and Assemblymember Kellis and Senator Webb to pass good cause eviction at the state level so that we could opt into it here in Ithaca. So that's the type of stuff that we could be doing. But beyond that, we're organizers. So we need to be bringing our people from Ithaca to Albany to get Assemblymember Kellis and State Senator Webb to not only co-sponsor these bills, but to fight for them. This is something that we need to spend political capital on, because we all understand that Ithaca is the second most expensive city behind New York City in New York State. Housing is a big portion of that. So this is something that we should be putting all of our efforts on. So I'm going to be spending my time rallying and bringing people to Albany to take this on head first.
Bring people to Albany. Take me too.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
That's one of the places where nowadays I think you can't get there by bus.
Nope.
And Hannah, do you have anything to add here?
I mean, Jorge said most of what I was thinking. I think that as city council, not only do we have to be, passing resolutions and legislation in the city, we also should be mobilizing the people in our communities, because this is something so many Ithacans care about. Currently, the only way that we have affordable housing is through tax abatements for large developers who often go back on their agreements and don't build sufficient affordable housing. And it also doesn't have to stay affordable. So what I really like about Pashney is the idea that it has to stay affordable, that it has to be democratically controlled, it's union built. This is really what gets us towards affordable housing in Ithaca. So I personally am really excited to support this, both with this resolution and in Albany.
Great. And moving away from housing to, you might say, the way people afford to pay rents, we had good cause in when a landlord wants to evict you, but there is also an issue called just cause. And Jorge, I believe you have been involved with this.
You could say that for sure. And I can't tell you how many times I've encountered people in the day-to-day in Ithaca being like, "You want to pass just cause protections? We already did that. You did that." And they're like, "No, no, no, this is a whole different thing." But it's very similar. So this all started back in 2022 when many of us here were on those picket lines supporting our incredible Starbucks workers who were doing their historic unionization effort up until Starbucks playing their ultimate card and closing down the businesses as a last attempt to bust the union and firing all those workers as a result. I spent the next couple of months going around speaking to union advocates, to labor lawyers, to policy experts, saying, how can we prevent something like this from happening? There's simply no way that we can allow a big corporation to come in and bully our neighbors. They closed down every store for Starbucks in the city of Ithaca that was owned by Starbucks, including the one in my district in Collegetown. So how can we stop this from ever happening again? And I was put onto the idea of fast food just cause labor protections that had just been passed in New York City to basically create a just cause style progressive discipline that we often see in labor contracts and then for labor unions for all fast food workers. And even better, the law had been challenged in the New York court system by the fast food industry on the same grounds that good cause eviction had been challenged and was upheld as something that cities can do. And so we had a green light to do that. And so thanks to our incredible comrades in DSA and the Working Families Party, we got connected to the organizers in Just Cause and in the National Employment Law Project, NELP. And we got to working on a version of Just Cause that would effectively abolish at-will employment in the city of Ithaca and require that employers provide their workers with a just cause for termination. And we've been talking about this for quite some time now, and it's, I think, very close to being put over the finish line. And with me and Hannah joining Kayla, who's been holding this down courageously in the city council, I think we're going to have the final push to get it over the finish line.
And Hannah, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, so something that a lot of people ask me when I talk about just cause is, why do we need just cause? We already have civil rights protections. We have, disability protections. You can't fire people for unionizing. But as we saw in Ithaca, you really can't, because the enforcement mechanisms are so weak, where you have to appeal and you need to go to a federal level agency, Department of Labor, National Labor Relations Board. And especially right now under the Trump administration, these agencies have been hollowed out. So I think just cause is more important than ever, because it really just provides the protections that we legally already have, but there's no one to enforce it. So being able to enforce it on a city level, making sure that these Starbucks workers, instead of waiting 2 years to receive back pay, they were promised their jobs back. That obviously never happened. Having an agency in Ithaca, the Worker Rights Commission, to handle that in a much more timely manner would make a huge difference for workers who are unfairly terminated for a variety of reasons. And it's just a basic rights protection where, you should know that when you go into work, you have a chance to fix whatever it is that's going on before you're discarded. It's important for the culture of the company and for the employer. They save a lot of money on constantly rehiring people and training them. And it's important to the worker because they can do their best work possible and feel agency and pride in their work, knowing that they have, a good relationship with their employer and that kind of stability.
And finally, Hannah Shvets and Jorge DeFendini, a pet peeve of mine in this city is the lack of public toilets in many places at many times. This is an issue for two very different groups: homeless people and many elderly people, I think especially women. I think the city controls enough land to do something about that. Hannah, have you thought about it?
I think that would be really important, like you said, for our unhoused population, but also for Ithacans who are downtown and, around the city and have nowhere to go when they need to go to the bathroom. So I think the city should definitely look into building those types of public facilities.
And Jorge, have you thought about it?
Absolutely. And I thought about it in one of the most uncanny or very surprising places. And I would say when I went in 2023, before the election started, on vacation with my family to Disney World, and I was walking around, I was like, oh my God, this theme park has some really good urban planning. There's a bathroom on just about every corner, and it's very accessible to get all around. And it is, while he was no radical leftist himself, Mr. Disney had very much envisioned and hoped of trying to develop something of a planned city himself. And you can see that really manifested in these theme parks. And all of that to say that when I come back to Ithaca, you find yourself like trying to like get around downtown and on the south side. And if you have to go, there aren't a whole lot of options, especially if you don't have any money on you. Unfortunately, something that I've seen here as I saw growing up in Queens is that many businesses have taken on a policy of if you're not a customer, we're not going to let you use the bathroom. And this could be like a nightmare for some people who really need to go and are trying to communicate that it's an emergency. And so actually, I'm very excited to see that one of the elements of the Ithaca Green New Deal, surprisingly, with the participatory budgeting, has considered something along the lines of more public bathrooms as a potential pilot for how we could enact this experiment with sort of radical democracy and budgetary decision making in the city. So it's something I'm definitely supporting. And even if it doesn't happen with the participatory budgeting, I want to see us take on an effort to, put up a couple of porta potties or some type of developments where we could make it more accessible for people to use the bathroom without having their wallets on them.
Thank you, Jorge DeFendini and Hannah Shvets, for telling us about some of the issues you're planning to take up on Common Council in the new year. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.